Come on, ancient warrior, prove you're awake. $100 says your best shot wouldn't even find the 7 ring on purpose. The words cracked across the Air Force Base firing range like a slap, loud enough to freeze a few recruits mid-reload as their laughter simmered in the dry afternoon heat. The insult hit harder than the wind itself. Airman First Class Riker stood there smirking, hands on his hips, basking in the attention his outburst earned him. Around him, clusters of trainees exchanged amused glances, their confidence swelling in the presence of easy cruelty. Mockery spread through the crowd like a ripple on still water. But the elderly man they taunted, a quiet figure in a faded bomber jacket, didn't so much as turn his head. His stance remained composed, his breathing steady, and his eyes focused forward with a stillness that felt older than all of them combined. And that was the moment something unseen began shifting in the room. Riker wasn't finished, not even close. He stepped closer to the veteran, rolling his shoulders like a man preparing for a victory he believed was already his. "You hear me, old-timer?" he barked, waving the crisp bill for emphasis. "This isn't bingo night. Out here you actually need eyesight." A few recruits chuckled louder this time, encouraged by his boldness and the lack of reaction from the man he mocked. The arrogance was starting to crystallize into something uglier. The veteran continued standing in line with a calmness that felt strangely deliberate, as though every insult slid off him without leaving a mark. He didn't glare, didn't respond, and didn't rise to the provocation. He simply waited. A few older NCOs nearby exchanged quiet looks, sensing something the younger airman couldn't yet understand. There was a steadiness to him, a weight, a kind of disciplined silence that didn't fit the role of an easy target. Even the wind seemed to pause around him. Riker, annoyed by the lack of reaction, upped his volume. "Come on, sir," he mocked sharply. "Tell me you can at least hold the weapon without shaking." But when the veteran finally shifted his eyes toward him, it wasn't anger that flowed in, just a calm, unreadable patience that made a couple of bystanders straighten unconsciously. Attention settled into the space between them, subtle but unmistakable. Something about that look suggested he'd seen far worse than insults. More recruits began drifting closer, pretending to check equipment while positioning themselves for a better view, sensing the beginnings of a confrontation worth watching. Unspoken curiosity prickled through the crowd as the veteran inhaled gently, shoulders setting with quiet precision. And in that stillness, the room felt like it was waiting for the truth to surface. Riker's smirk tightened as he leaned forward, the $100 bill now dangling provocatively between his fingers. "I don't think you get it, Grandpa. This isn't a retirement home contest. Either you hit the target or you embarrass yourself in front of everyone." His voice carried across the range, sharp enough to slice through the hum of rifles and the distant clatter of brass. The air itself seemed to bristle with his audacity. The veteran, however, didn't react. He picked up his rifle with a grace that suggested muscle memory older than most of the recruits' lives, fingers brushing the stock like it had been a familiar companion for decades. Every motion was precise, deliberate, and controlled, yet effortless. Even the slightest twitch of his eye betrayed nothing, no hint of impatience, no acknowledgement of insult. A quiet power was settling into his presence like a shadow stretching at dusk. Riker's peers leaned in, nudging each other and snickering, expecting a falter, a mistake, but none came. Every time Riker jeered or jabbed verbally, the veteran's composure never wavered. The room felt uncomfortably charged, the dynamic shifting imperceptibly as the crowd began to sense that this man's silence was not weakness, it was calculation. Something unseen was coiling in his calm. Finally, with deliberate slowness, the veteran lifted his rifle to aim, the metal glinting under the sun. The tension among the recruits became almost tangible, like static before a storm. Riker scoffed, leaning in, but even his bravado began to waver under the weight of anticipation. Everyone knew, without knowing how, that what was about to happen could change everything. If you want more stories like this, follow for the next chapter. The sharp echo of boots against concrete announced the arrival of Major Harrington, a tall, disciplined officer whose mere presence seemed to recalibrate the energy on the range. Conversations stuttered and died as recruits straightened instinctively, the smirks fading from their faces. Major Harrington's gaze fell immediately on the veteran, and for a fraction of a second, something unspoken passed between them, a recognition, subtle but undeniable. The atmosphere shifted, suddenly heavier, as if gravity itself had taken notice. Riker, caught mid-jeer, faltered under the scrutiny. His $100 bet felt suddenly foolish and trivial compared to the quiet authority that now anchored the veteran's side of the range. The major stepped closer, eyes narrowing slightly, scanning every detail. the veteran's posture, the worn rifle, and the calm precision of his movements. Even from this distance, it was clear this was no ordinary retiree. The air hummed with unasked questions. The veteran, sensing the shift, allowed a slow, respectful nod toward Major Harrington. It was a simple gesture, but the recruits sensed it carried weight beyond explanation. Every casual observer felt it, the dynamic between youth and legend teetering on the edge of revelation. Riker's confidence wavered visibly, replaced by a flicker of uncertainty he hadn't experienced before. A quiet tension promised that secrets long buried were inching toward the surface. Harrington didn't speak yet, but his presence alone made the arrogant recruit shrink slightly, awareness dawning that his challenge might have awakened something far beyond his comprehension. And in that pregnant pause, the first threads of truth began weaving themselves into the air. Major Harrington finally spoke, his voice calm but carrying an edge that made even the boldest recruit stiffen. "Sir," he said, addressing the veteran with formal respect, "we rarely see someone of your experience here. Care to remind us of your background before we proceed?" The question hung in the air like a challenge wrapped in courtesy. Every eye on the range tightened its focus, sensing a story about to unfold. The veteran lifted his gaze slowly, locking eyes with the major for a heartbeat that felt like eternity. Then, in a voice low and measured, he said, "I was a sniper instructor for 20 years. Trained the best, guided them through operations no one outside this branch ever hears about." He paused, letting the weight of those words settle, letting the silence expand as recruits shifted uncomfortably, realizing their assumptions had been shallow. A ripple of disbelief began to course through the crowd. Riker's confident grin faltered as he processed the words, the $100 bet suddenly meaningless in the shadow of history. He stuttered a question, voice wavering, "Why, trained them?" But the veteran's calm reply didn't dignify mockery. It simply affirmed a reality that Riker had no frame to comprehend. Panic and awe wrestled for dominance in the young recruit's mind. The crowd held its collective breath, the once lively range now thick with tension. Even the distant clang of spent brass sounded muted against the gravity of the revelation. Major Harrington's sharp gaze softened slightly, as though acknowledging a legend long hidden. Something monumental was about to be revealed, and no one could predict its full impact. The veteran slowly shouldered his rifle, the familiar weight of it an extension of decades of discipline, training, and precision. His eyes swept over the recruits, landing finally on Riker, whose bravado had drained to pale uncertainty. "You want to see what 5 bullseyes look like?" he asked quietly, almost to himself. "I've hit them without blinking in conditions you couldn't survive a minute in." The words carried the weight of legend, the kind only earned through relentless service. The silence that followed felt like the calm before a storm nobody could escape. Riker's jaw tightened, a flicker of defiance still clinging, but his confidence was cracking. The veteran lifted the rifle, measured his stance, and began each round finding the center of the target with an ease that seemed almost unreal. The metallic thud of each shot echoed like a heartbeat, each bullseye imprinting a visual shock onto the crowd, their disbelief growing with every precise impact. Every recruit felt the sting of their arrogance confronting history itself. Major Harrington's eyes widened slightly, a silent acknowledgement of what the veteran had once been and still was. The legend in front of them was no mere story whispered in mess halls. It was alive, breathing through steady hands and unflinching precision. The recruits watched, slack-jawed, as 5 consecutive rounds buried themselves dead center, each one punctuating the veteran's quiet authority. Riker's face went pale as reality settled like ice in his veins. Finally, the veteran lowered the rifle, his gaze sweeping the range like a teacher surveying pupils who had underestimated him for far too long. The crowd exhaled collectively, the awe so thick it felt almost tactile. Riker's smirk was gone, replaced by a raw, humbled respect he didn't know how to voice. And in that moment, the legend was no longer whispered, it was undeniable. "Want part 2? Hit follow so you don't miss it." The firing range was silent, save for the occasional scrape of a boot against concrete. The air hung heavy with the weight of what had just occurred. 5 perfect bullseyes, each one a testament to decades of unseen mastery. Riker stood frozen, his $100 bet now meaningless, his arrogance replaced by a raw, gnawing humility. Every recruit felt the sting of witnessing a legend erase their assumptions. The veteran's presence seemed to expand, filling the space with quiet authority. Each movement, each subtle breath, reminded everyone that respect could not be demanded. It was earned, and he had done so long before this day. Even those who had mocked him found themselves involuntarily straightening, as though his dignity pressed gently but firmly against their consciousness. A collective awe had settled like a tide over the entire range. Riker finally sank to a knee, staring down at the targets as if they held the answers to questions he hadn't dared ask. His bravado was gone, replaced by shame and reverence, emotions that churned unpredictably in his chest. He could not reconcile the veteran's calm precision with the mocking image he had carried in his mind. The realization hit him like a cold gust. He had underestimated something far greater than himself. Around them, whispers spread, the recruits exchanging stunned glances, the weight of what they had just witnessed leaving them both shaken and enlightened. Major Harrington nodded subtly, a silent affirmation that the lesson had been delivered in full force, without a single raised voice. And somewhere deep inside, Riker understood that his humiliation had transformed into the beginning of true respect. Major Harrington stepped forward, his boots crisp against the concrete, and addressed Riker with calm authority. "Airman Riker," he said, voice steady and unshakable, "this kind of arrogance has consequences. You mocked a veteran whose service shaped the very precision we trained for here." The words landed heavier than any insult or snicker ever could. Discipline now carried a weight far beyond punishment. Riker's shoulders slumped under the Major's gaze, the enormity of his mistake pressing on him. The recruits nearby watched as Harrington detailed the consequences: extra duty, a formal reprimand, and mandatory study of the veteran's history and contributions. There was no rage, no shouting, only measured justice delivered with the dignity of someone who understood how to correct without humiliating. The lesson cut deeper than any personal insult could. The veteran observed silently, a subtle nod of acknowledgement passing between him and the Major. His presence alone had shifted the room's power dynamic, showing that true authority came not from youth or volume but from experience, skill, and earned respect. The recruits' initial laughter had transformed into thoughtful reflection, a moral imprint that would linger far longer than any momentary bet. And in that quiet enforcement, the final measure of character had been revealed. The veteran lowered his rifle completely, the weight of his years and service settling into the air like a tangible presence. His eyes swept across the recruits, resting briefly on Riker, who still trembled slightly from the combination of fear, awe, and newfound respect. "It's not about proving yourself to others," the veteran said, voice calm but carrying the weight of decades. "It's about knowing who you are even when no one is watching." A hush fell over the range as if time itself had paused to listen. Riker, finally finding his voice, muttered a shaky, "Sir, I understand now." The words were simple, but they held a weight far greater than any boast or bet could ever carry. Around them, the recruits absorbed the lesson, the moral imprint settling firmly in their consciousness. Arrogance fades, but respect earned through discipline and humility endures. And in that understanding, a quiet redemption began to bloom. The veteran offered one final humble nod, his gaze softening, signaling not judgment but forgiveness. The range, once filled with mocking laughter and competitive bravado, now felt charged with reflection, respect, and the silent gravity of lessons learned the hard way. And in that fleeting moment, the true meaning of legacy became undeniable. Follow for more real-life veteran stories. The veteran stepped back, rifle slung loosely over his shoulder, and allowed the sun to catch the lines of his face, the weight of history reflected in his calm eyes. Around him, the range remained silent, the echoes of brass and laughter replaced by awe, respect, and an unspoken understanding that some legends are not told, they are experienced. Riker lowered his gaze, humbled beyond words, and the other recruits looked on with a mixture of fear, reverence, and inspiration. In that moment it was clear, true mastery earned through decades of discipline, patience, and unyielding dedication, leaves an imprint far deeper than any boast or bet ever could. The legend had spoken and the world had listened.